The final 24 hours before an execution are not measured in time. They are measured in weight. Every tick of the clock grows louder. Every minute stretches longer than the last. For the person waiting on death row, time no longer moves forward, it presses down. If you think you understand what waiting feels like, pause here. This is not waiting for news, or a decision, or an outcome. This is waiting for something that has already been decided. And that is what makes the final day so psychologically devastating. In prisons across the United States, the last 24 hours follow a rigid structure. The system is precise, controlled, predictable, but inside the mind of the condemned, nothing is orderly. Thoughts loop. Memories surface uninvited. Regret, denial, fear, and resignation collide in waves. Ask yourself honestly, how would your mind behave if tomorrow had an ending you couldn't escape? The morning usually begins quietly. A guard arrives earlier than usual. The tone is different, not cruel, not kind, just final. The condemned prisoner is informed that this is the day. Even when they already know, hearing it spoken aloud shifts something deep inside. For some, it feels surreal. For others, it confirms a truth they've been rehearsing for years. Some prisoners sleep poorly the night before. Others don't sleep at all. A few fall into an exhausted, unnatural calm. Psychologists who have studied death row inmates describe this state as temporal collapse, when the future disappears and the mind struggles to orient itself. If the future is gone, what does the present even mean? Think about that for a moment before continuing. Meals on the final day are symbolic. The so-called last meal has become one of the most discussed rituals surrounding executions, but what's less talked about is how often the food goes untouched. Some prisoners eat mechanically. Some refuse entirely. Others request something deeply personal, not indulgent, but familiar, a reminder of childhood, a taste tied to memory. Food becomes less about hunger and more about grounding, a final attempt to feel human in a system that has reduced existence to procedure. If you were allowed one last familiar comfort, would it even matter in a moment like this? As the day progresses, visits may be allowed. Lawyers arrive with updates that rarely change anything. Appeals are discussed, even when hope is razor-thin. Families sit across from thick glass or metal barriers, trying to compress entire lifetimes into minutes. Words stumble. Silences stretch. Some families cry. Others avoid tears, believing composure is a final gift. There are moments where no one knows what to say, because there is nothing adequate to say. Imagine knowing every goodbye is permanent. Would you speak, or would you sit in silence and let presence replace language? For those without visitors, the isolation is sharper. No footsteps approaching. No voices calling their name. Just the walls, the air, and the clock. This is often when reflection turns inward. Prisoners replay decisions. Not always the crime, but the moments that came before it. The fork in the road. The night that could have ended differently. The choice that still echoes. Many describe this as the most painful part of the process. Not fear of death, but awareness of irreversible moments. Pause here. This is where audiences lean forward. This is where people comment because they recognize something painfully human. Religious counselors or spiritual advisors are often offered. Some prisoners accept. Others decline. Faith can become louder in the final hours, or completely silent. Some seek forgiveness. Some seek meaning. Some simply seek company. And some ask questions with no answers. Why me? Why now? Why this way? If you've ever questioned fairness or fate in your own life, you already understand why this moment resonates so deeply with viewers. As afternoon turns into evening, the atmosphere changes again. Guards rotate. Procedures intensify. Paperwork is finalized. Witness lists are confirmed. The prison becomes quieter, not louder. This is not chaos. It is controlled inevitability. And that calm can be terrifying. Witnesses who have described this period often say it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Even people trained to remain detached feel the shift. If professionals feel it, imagine what the person at the center of it feels. Take a second here. Let that sink in. The condemned is usually moved closer to the execution chamber. Not inside, just closer. The distance shrinks. Space becomes symbolic. Each step is not physical, it's psychological. The walls feel tighter. The ceiling lower. The room heavier. This is when some prisoners break down. Others grow eerily calm. Emotional responses vary wildly, and that unpredictability is part of what keeps audiences hooked to these stories. There is no single way to face the end. Which reaction do you think is stronger, fear or calm acceptance? Time behaves strangely in these hours. 5 minutes can feel like an hour. An hour can disappear instantly. Prisoners describe moments of dissociation, feeling detached from their bodies, watching events happen as if they're happening to someone else. The mind tries to protect itself by stepping back. This psychological distancing is not weakness. It is survival, and it raises an uncomfortable question. If the human mind must fracture itself to endure the final day, what does that say about the process itself? As the final evening approaches, the possibility of a stay or last-minute appeal still technically exists. Phones ring. Officials check updates. Hope flickers, not because it's strong, but because it's human. This is one of the most emotionally charged aspects of the final 24 hours. Hope that hurts more than it heals. If you've ever hoped for something you knew was unlikely, you understand the cruelty of that waiting. People watching these stories often comment here, because hope, even false hope, is something everyone recognizes. Eventually, there is a final confirmation. No more calls. No more delays. The execution will proceed. This moment is quiet. There is no announcement. No dramatic signal. Just a shift in posture. A subtle change in behavior. Everyone knows. For the condemned, this is the moment when uncertainty ends and certainty begins. Strangely, some describe relief. Not happiness. Not peace. Relief. The waiting is over. Ask yourself honestly. Is certainty worse than fear, or is fear worse than certainty? As Chapter 1 closes, understand this. The final 24 hours are not about death itself. They are about anticipation, awareness, reflection, the unbearable clarity that comes when nothing can be postponed anymore. This is why these stories captivate audiences across the world. Not because of the act that follows, but because of the human experience that leads up to it. People see themselves in the waiting, the regret, the hope, the silence. Before moving on, sit with this thought. If you knew tomorrow had an ending, what would matter today? Let that question stay with you, because what happens next only gets heavier. There is a moment when waiting ends and movement begins. For hours, sometimes years, everything has been about stillness. Sitting, waiting, listening, thinking. But eventually, the door opens. And when it does, the body moves even if the mind hasn't caught up yet. This is known simply as the walk. Not because it's long, not because it's dramatic, but because it is final. And once it begins, there is no turning back. The condemned is informed that it is time. Not loudly, not ceremoniously, usually with a simple phrase. A signal delivered in a neutral tone that carries more weight than any speech ever could. Witnesses often describe the atmosphere at this moment as unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels deliberate, controlled, as if the world itself has agreed not to interfere. Imagine standing up knowing it's the last time you ever will. That single action, rising from a chair, becomes symbolic. Ordinary movement transformed into a point of no return. Pause for a second and really picture that. The walk itself is usually short, sometimes only a few dozen steps. But distance loses meaning here. Each step feels separate, isolated, heavy with awareness. Prisoners are escorted by guards trained to remain composed, but even among professionals, this moment leaves a mark. Some condemned individuals walk slowly. Others move quickly, almost urgently, as if motion itself is a way to cope. A few stumble, not from physical weakness, but from the overwhelming pressure of the moment. There is no right way to walk toward the end. And that unpredictability is what makes this moment so haunting to those who witness it. What's rarely discussed is what the condemned sees. The walls, the floor, the lights overhead. Details they may have passed 100 times before now feel unfamiliar. Heightened, sharp. The mind clings to small sensory details as if they might anchor reality. Some people notice the sound of their own breathing. Others fixate on footsteps, theirs or the guards. For a few, time seems to fracture. Seconds stretch. The body moves, but the mind floats somewhere else entirely. If you've ever experienced a moment where reality felt unreal, you're closer to understanding this than you think. Eyewitnesses have described a strange contradiction during the walk, tension mixed with routine. The procedures are rehearsed. Everyone knows their role, and yet nothing about the moment feels ordinary. This is where the system and the human experience collide. The system moves forward with efficiency. The human mind struggles to keep pace. And viewers watching these stories feel that collision deeply. It's why comment sections light up here. People argue, reflect, question, because this moment forces confrontation with ideas most people avoid. Some condemned individuals speak during the walk. Not speeches, not declarations, simple phrases, requests, clarifications, sometimes nothing at all. Silence, in these moments, can be louder than words. There are prisoners who stare straight ahead, refusing eye contact. Others glance around, absorbing everything one last time. A few look directly at the witnesses when they enter the room, a gaze that many witnesses say they never forget. Ask yourself honestly, would you look or would you look away? The emotional reactions during the walk vary dramatically. Some display visible fear. Others appear calm to the point of unsettling. A few seem detached, as if already halfway gone. This range of responses reminds us of an uncomfortable truth. The human mind does not face endings uniformly, and that inconsistency challenges simple narratives. Viewers often expect one emotion, terror, regret, anger, but reality refuses to perform on cue. This is where the story deepens, and where people stay watching longer than they expected. Guards escorting the condemned are trained not to speak unless necessary. Still, there are moments of quiet humanity, a slight pause, a steadying presence, a subtle acknowledgement. These are not acts of rebellion against the system, but reminders that systems are carried out by people. Some guards later admit that the walk is the hardest part of their job, not the paperwork, not the aftermath, the walk, because it is the one moment where everyone involved is fully aware of what is happening and what cannot be undone. Let that settle before moving on. As the condemned approaches the chamber, awareness sharpens again. This is often when emotions peak or flatten completely. The body responds differently than the mind expects. Heart rates rise. Breathing patterns change. Some prisoners experience sudden clarity. Others experience numbness. Psychologists describe this as acute existential focus, when all distractions vanish and only the present moment remains. No past, no future, just now. If you've ever had a moment where everything else disappeared, you felt a trace of this state. Witnesses inside the room often describe an overwhelming sense of gravity as the condemned enters. Conversations stop. Movement slow. Attention converges. This is the threshold, the space between anticipation and action. And yet, nothing graphic defines it. No spectacle. No chaos. Just presence. Stillness. Awareness. This is why responsible storytelling focuses here, not on what happens next, but on what it feels like to arrive at the edge. There are cases where condemned individuals falter at this point. Emotion breaks through. Tears, trembling, sudden expressions of regret or resolve. There are also cases where they remain composed to the end, defying expectations. Neither response is more authentic than the other. And that complexity is what makes this chapter resonate across cultures, across beliefs, across borders. If you've ever judged how someone should react in a crisis, this moment quietly challenges that instinct. The walk ends not with drama, but with stillness. The condemned reaches the chamber. Movement stops. Time feels suspended. This is where anticipation gives way to inevitability. For viewers, this is often the most difficult point to watch, not because of what happens, but because of what it represents. A moment where everything has narrowed to a single outcome. And this is where many people pause the video, reflect, comment, share, because this moment doesn't ask for shock, it asks for thought. As Chapter 2 closes, understand this. The walk to the chamber is not about steps taken. It is about the space between them, the awareness carried in silence, the weight of knowing that movement itself has become irreversible. This is not a story about death. It is a story about crossing a threshold. And once crossed, nothing is ever the same. Before continuing, consider this quietly. If you were walking toward an ending, what would you carry with you? Fear, acceptance, or something else entirely? The final interactions are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, fragmented, human. This is the part of the process most people never see, not because it's hidden, but because it doesn't fit simple narratives. There are no speeches rehearsed for history, no perfect closing scenes, just people talking to other people, knowing time is almost gone. And somehow, that makes it heavier than anything else. In the hours before an execution, the condemned may speak with several people. guards, lawyers, spiritual advisors, medical staff. Each interaction carries a different weight. Each conversation exists under the same shadow, yet unfolds differently. What's striking is how ordinary many of these moments feel. A question about the time, a clarification about procedure, a thank you, a pause that lasts too long. If you're expecting grand declarations, this chapter often surprises viewers, and that surprise keeps them watching. One of the most emotionally complex interactions happens with guards. These are not strangers. In many cases, guards have known the condemned for years. They've exchanged greetings, enforced rules, shared routines. And now, those routines end. Some guards keep their distance, relying on professionalism as a shield. Others allow small gestures of humanity, a steady voice, a moment of patience, a simple acknowledgement. Not because they are breaking protocol, but because they are human. Former correctional officers have admitted that these interactions stay with them longer than any other part of the job. Not the outcome, the conversation. Ask yourself quietly, how would you speak to someone you knew was about to face the end? Lawyers often arrive carrying a complicated mix of hope and resignation. Even at this stage, legal discussions continue. Appeals are reviewed one last time. Paperwork is checked. Technicalities are explained. The language is precise, controlled, restrained. But beneath that professionalism is often something unspoken, the awareness that this is likely the final conversation. Some condemned individuals ask practical questions. Others ask nothing at all. A few ask questions that have nothing to do with the law, questions about family, about the outside world, about time. These moments blur the line between client and human being, and viewers tend to feel that shift deeply. For those who meet with spiritual advisors, the conversations vary widely. Some speak about faith openly. Others wrestle with doubt. There are moments of prayer, reflection, silence. Sometimes anger surfaces. Sometimes gratitude. Sometimes confusion. What's important here is not belief, but presence. Many advisors later describe this as less about answers and more about listening. Because at this point, answers often feel inadequate. If you've ever sat with someone in a moment where words didn't help, you already understand the gravity of this interaction. Family interactions, when allowed, are the most emotionally charged. Time is limited. Privacy is restricted. The setting is anything but comforting. And yet, within those constraints, families try to compress entire relationships into minutes. Some conversations are filled with tears. Others avoid them entirely. Some families talk about memories, birthdays, shared jokes, moments that feel painfully distant now. Others focus on reassurance, offering comfort even when they themselves are breaking inside. There are also families who cannot bring themselves to come. Absence becomes its own kind of interaction. Viewers often pause here, because family is where abstraction collapses into reality. For condemned individuals without family support, the loneliness of this stage is profound. No familiar faces, no shared history, just officials and professionals performing their roles. This absence often amplifies reflection. Prisoners in this position have been reported to speak more with guards or advisors, not because they are close, but because silence feels unbearable. Human beings are wired for connection, especially at the end. And that truth resonates universally. One of the most overlooked interactions is with medical personnel. These conversations are typically brief, procedural, and neutral. Questions about physical condition, clarifications, confirmations. Everything is calm, controlled. And yet, for the condemned, these exchanges often feel surreal. The presence of medical staff reinforces the reality of what is about to happen, not emotionally, but institutionally. It's a reminder that this moment is not spontaneous. It is planned, and that realization lands heavily for viewers who are paying attention. Not all final interactions are spoken. Some condemned individuals choose silence. They answer questions with nods. They listen without responding. Silence becomes their language. Psychologists suggest that silence at this stage can serve many purposes: control, dignity, protection, withdrawal. It is not necessarily resignation. Silence, in this context, is a decision. And decisions, even small ones, matter when everything else feels predetermined. There are also moments of unexpected kindness. A guard adjusting restraints more gently. An advisor staying a few seconds longer. A lawyer offering reassurance even when none remains. These moments don't change the outcome, but they change the experience. Viewers often comment on these details because they reveal cracks in systems that appear otherwise rigid. They show that even within strict procedures, humanity still finds small spaces to breathe. As the final interactions draw to a close, a shift occurs. Conversations become shorter. Movements become more deliberate. The flow of people changes. Everyone involved senses the narrowing of time. This is often when condemned individuals become more inward-focused. They speak less. They listen more. Awareness turns inward. The mind begins to prepare for something words can no longer reach. If you've ever felt yourself withdrawing inward before a difficult moment, you recognize this transition. One of the most emotionally striking aspects of this stage is unfinished conversation. Things left unsaid. Questions never asked. Apologies that arrive too late. Forgiveness that remains complicated. These absences linger long after the execution itself. Families carry them. Guards remember them. Advisors reflect on them. And viewers feel them, because unfinished business is something everyone understands. As Chapter 3 comes to a close, what stands out is not drama, but intimacy. These final interactions strip away labels. Inmate, guard, lawyer, witness. What remains are people navigating a moment that resists simplification. This is why audiences stay engaged here. Because it's not about judgment, it's about recognition. Before moving forward, consider this quietly. If you knew this was your final conversation, who would you speak to? And what would you leave unsaid? The next chapter brings us to the point where words begin to fall away altogether. There is a point where movement ends. Not because everything has finished, but because everything has narrowed. The condemned has arrived. The room is prepared. Procedures are in place. Yet what defines this moment is not action, but suspension. A strange pause where time feels different, heavier, almost artificial. This is the moment witnesses struggle to describe. Because language fails when time stops behaving normally. People often imagine this stage as dramatic or chaotic. In reality, it is defined by quiet. A silence that is not peaceful, but intentional. A silence shaped by awareness. Everyone in the room understands exactly what is about to happen. The condemned is positioned. Movements are careful, deliberate. No one rushes. No one lingers unnecessarily. This precision creates a sense of unreality, as if the room exists outside normal life. If you're watching this unfold, this is often where your breathing changes without you noticing. Psychologists describe this phase as temporal suspension, when anticipation peaks and the mind becomes hyper-focused on the present moment. The past fades. The future collapses. All that exists is now. For the condemned, this can produce wildly different internal experiences. Some report heightened awareness, every sound amplified, every sensation sharp. Others describe numbness, a protective withdrawal from overwhelming reality. Neither response is unusual. Both are human. Ask yourself quietly, when faced with something irreversible, would your mind sharpen or shut down? Witnesses in the room often describe an overwhelming sense of gravity. Not fear, not panic. Gravity. Conversation stops. Even professionals who have been through this before report a physical sensation, as if the air itself has thickened. Movement feels slower. Sound carries differently. This is the moment where abstraction disappears. Debate vanishes. Statistics lose meaning. Only presence remains. One of the most striking elements of this stage is eye contact. Some condemned individuals look directly at witnesses. Others close their eyes. Some stare at nothing in particular, as if focusing inward. These choices are deeply personal and often misunderstood. There is no universal response to final awareness. Viewers frequently comment on this moment because it challenges assumptions. There is no script for how a person should face the end, and reality refuses to conform to expectations. The body reacts even when the mind tries to remain steady. Heart rates shift. Breathing patterns change. Muscles tense or relax unpredictably. These are involuntary responses, reminders that this experience is not symbolic, philosophical, or distant. It is immediate. It is embodied. And that reality lands hard on anyone paying attention. Silence dominates this stage. Not awkward silence. Not empty silence. Purposeful silence. It is during this silence that some condemned individuals reflect internally on family, memories, faith, regret, or acceptance. Others describe a blankness that arrives suddenly, like a mental fog. Both experiences are attempts at survival. If you've ever found yourself quiet before a life-altering moment, you understand this instinctively. Those present often report that time feels distorted. Minutes stretch unbearably long. Seconds feel suspended. This distortion affects everyone, not just the condemned. Witnesses later struggle to recall precise sequences. Memory fragments. Details blur. The mind records emotion more clearly than chronology. This is why accounts of this moment vary so widely. Not because people are dishonest, but because time itself becomes unreliable. Professionals in the room rely heavily on routine at this stage. Routine provides structure when emotion threatens to intrude. Movements are practiced. Steps are followed carefully. This is not coldness, it is containment. Without structure, the emotional weight would be unmanageable. And yet, within this structure, human awareness remains fully present. That contradiction defines this moment. For the condemned, this is often when final acceptance or resistance surfaces, internally, not theatrically. Acceptance does not mean peace. Resistance does not mean panic. These concepts are far more nuanced than popular portrayals suggest. Some individuals report a sudden clarity. Others report confusion. Some feel nothing at all. There is no single right emotional endpoint. This reality challenges simple moral narratives, and that complexity is why audiences stay engaged. Witnesses often describe this stage as the hardest to endure, not because of what happens, but because of what doesn't. There is no release yet, no resolution, just awareness suspended in time, waiting without distraction. This is where many viewers lean back, pause the video, or sit quietly afterward, because this moment demands reflection, not reaction. One of the most overlooked aspects of this stage is how ordinary it appears. No dramatic lighting, no cinematic music, no elevated dialogue, just people in a room, aware of finality. That ordinariness is what makes it unsettling, because it suggests that profound moments do not announce themselves, they simply arrive. For some condemned individuals, this is when thoughts turn outward, to family, to victims, to unanswered questions, to moments that define their lives. These reflections are often fragmented, emotional, incomplete. The human mind does not deliver neat conclusions under pressure, and that imperfection is what makes this moment deeply relatable. For viewers, this chapter often provokes the most internal response. Not anger, not outrage, stillness. People find themselves questioning assumptions they didn't know they held. About justice, about punishment, about certainty. This is where comment sections shift tone from debate to reflection. As the moment stretches, the body often grows still. Movement becomes minimal. Awareness turns inward. The room settles into a state of readiness. This is not an ending yet, but it feels like one. A threshold where time no longer behaves as expected. As Chapter 4 closes, understand this. The moment time stops is not defined by action. It is defined by awareness. It is the quiet space where everything that has led up to this point converges, without resolution, without spectacle. This is why it lingers in memory long after details fade. Before moving forward, sit with this question. If time stopped for you right now, what would your mind reach for first? The final chapter explores what happens when time starts moving again and nothing feels the same. When it's over, nothing announces it. There is no dramatic release, no clear emotional resolution, no sense that something has been completed in a way that feels whole. Instead, time resumes, awkwardly, unevenly, and everyone in the room must figure out how to re-enter a world that feels slightly altered. This is the part almost no one talks about. Not because it isn't important, but because it's harder to explain. The immediate aftermath is defined by stillness giving way to motion. Professionals resume procedure. Chairs shift. Papers are gathered. People avoid each other's eyes. The room that moments ago felt suspended now feels strangely ordinary again, and that contrast can be deeply unsettling. Witnesses often describe a sense of disorientation, as if they've stepped out of a sealed environment and into reality too quickly. The mind struggles to catch up with the body. If you've ever left a heavy moment and felt the world moving too fast, you already understand this sensation. For witnesses, the experience doesn't end when they leave the room. Many report lingering images, not of action, but of stillness. A posture, a look, a moment of silence that refuses to fade. These memories surface unexpectedly, sometimes years later, triggered by unrelated moments. This is why people who witness executions rarely speak about them casually. The experience resists casual language. Guards and staff return to routine, but routine feels different for a while. Shifts end. Roles resume. Procedures continue. Yet beneath that surface normalcy, something has shifted. Many correctional officers say they become quieter after an execution, more inward, less inclined toward small talk. Not because they are overwhelmed, but because they are processing. Human beings do not shed awareness simply because a process has concluded. Families of the condemned experience the aftermath in profoundly different ways. Some feel a crushing finality. Others feel a complicated blend of grief, relief, anger, or numbness. There is no single emotional arc, no universally correct response. For some families, the execution marks an ending. For others, it becomes the beginning of a new form of grief, one without anticipation, but filled with absence. If you've ever expected closure and found none, this will feel painfully familiar. Families of victims also experience the aftermath in complex ways. Public narratives often frame executions as resolution. But many victims' families report something very different. Some feel relief. Others feel emptiness. Some feel renewed grief. Others feel nothing at all and are confused by that absence. Justice, it turns out, does not guarantee emotional resolution. This is a truth that unsettles people and fuels conversation long after the story is told. Media response often arrives quickly. Headlines are written. Statements are quoted. Stories are summarized. But compression strips nuance. The complexity of the moment is flattened into digestible language. This is where many viewers begin questioning what they've been told, because what they felt watching does not match what they read afterward. And that gap drives engagement. Reflection, debate, public reaction varies widely. Some people express certainty. Others express doubt. Some argue morality. Others focus on legality. Social spaces fill with opinions that often say more about the speaker than the event itself. This is where stories extend beyond the execution chamber and into culture. And this is why these documentaries continue to circulate, because they don't end when the event ends. For some cases, questions emerge almost immediately. Was everything handled correctly? Were there unresolved doubts? Did the process feel just or merely complete? Even when procedures are followed precisely, uncertainty can linger. And uncertainty has a way of growing over time. If you've ever revisited a decision long after it was made, you understand why this happens. Memory behaves differently after an execution. Details blur. Emotional impressions sharpen. People remember how they felt more clearly than what they saw. This is why accounts differ, not because of dishonesty, but because memory prioritizes meaning over sequence. Over time, the execution becomes less of an event and more of a reference point, something people return to when thinking about justice, punishment, and human limits. For some, the aftermath brings activism. Questions turn into advocacy. Reflection turns into research. Silence turns into speech. People who once avoided the topic now feel compelled to engage with it, not because they are certain, but because uncertainty demands attention. This is one of the most powerful outcomes of these stories. They provoke engagement without prescribing answers. For others, the aftermath brings withdrawal. They avoid the topic entirely. Change the subject. Step away from the conversation. This is not indifference. It is self-protection. Some experiences are absorbed quietly. And quiet absorption does not mean the impact is less. As time passes, the execution becomes part of a larger narrative. It is referenced in discussions about law, ethics, policy, human behavior. It becomes a case study, not because it offers clarity, but because it resists it. This resistance is why these stories persist. What remains most striking is how rarely people describe feeling satisfied afterward. Even among those who support the system, satisfaction is not the dominant emotion. More often, it is solemnity, weight, reflection. This challenges assumptions, and that challenge keeps audiences thinking long after the screen goes dark. As this series closes, it's important to understand something. The end of an execution is not the end of its story. It continues in memory, in conversation, in doubt, in belief, in silence. That continuation is where meaning lives. If you've stayed through this entire journey, from anticipation to movement, from connection to stillness, from stillness to aftermath, you've already done something most people avoid. You've sat with complexity. And complexity does not offer simple conclusions. Before you leave this chapter, consider this quietly. What does justice mean to you when certainty fades? And how do we measure outcomes that leave so many questions behind? These are not questions meant to be answered quickly. They are questions meant to stay. If this series made you pause, reflect, or reconsider something you thought you understood, that reaction matters. Conversations begin where certainty ends. And this is where the story truly continues.